Right, welcome to Mrs. Long's video on Picture of Dorian Gray. This is the second part of the analysis of chapter 7. In the last video, we ended off with Sybil explaining to Dorian that she cannot play at being in love because she has discovered what reality really is. And we now have Dorian's reaction. Let's think back to Henry's words before he left the theatre. He said, "Dorian, what does it matter if she can't act? She's beautiful." But remember that Dorian's love for her was based on her talent. And perhaps even he was more in love with the character she played than the girl herself. So she says to him, "You made me understand what love really is. My love, Prince Charming, Prince of my life. You are more to me than all art can ever be. Take me away with you. You understand now what it signifies. Even if I could do it, it would be profanation for me to play at being in love." Okay, so from her perspective, she's now found her Prince Charming, as she very significantly calls him, and she feels that she can now escape her circumstances. She no longer needs to act. Besides, she's lost the will to do it. Acting used to transport her out of her unfortunate circumstances, but now she has Dorian to do that, and she cannot fake being in love if she isn't. Dorian, remember, he previously had hot tears welling up, and he went and hid his face in the corner, turned to the wall. He now has a similar little strop. He flings himself down the sofa, turns away, and says, "You have killed my love." Remember also, he's told her that she is ridiculous, and she bored him. "Yes," he cried, "you have killed my love. You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity. You simply produce no effect. I loved you because you were marvelous, because you had genius and intellect, because you realized the dreams of great poets, and gave shape and substance to the shadows of art. You have thrown it all away. You are shallow and stupid." Now, let's listen to the kind of things he's saying to her. "You've killed my love. You have no effect on me now. I loved you, past tense. You've thrown it all away. You are shallow and stupid. You are nothing to me now. I will never see you again. I will never think of you. I will never mention your name. You don't know what you were to me once. You have spoiled the romance of my life. I wish I'd never laid eyes upon you," he says. "Without your art, you are nothing." Now, perhaps if he'd based his love on little more than her art, the fact that her art is no longer there would mean that he had love left for her. "I would have made you famous, splendid, magnificent. The world would have worshipped you, and you would have borne my name. What are you now? A third-rate actress with a pretty face." And so, as quickly as Dorian's love, in inverted commas, for Sybil appeared, it has now disappeared because the foundation on which it was laid has also gone. And we can see the incredible cruelty now of his words. Remember, Sybil is young, she's inexperienced, she's naive. She has completely fallen for this older, handsome, rich, Prince Charming figure. And with all her heart probably thought she was doing the right thing by not wanting to act anymore, besides what would be the point. And now she's being met with such flagrant cruelty. And at one point she sort of flings herself down at his feet. "Don't touch me," he cries, because she's reached out for him. A low moan broke from her, and she flung herself and lay there like a trampled flower. She was a beautiful rose-pointed lips, narcissus, white lily throat. She now looks like a flower that has been stomped on. "Don't leave me." She crouched on the floor like a wounded thing, and Dorian, with his beautiful eyes, looked down at her, and his chiseled lips curled in exquisite disdain. Okay, so he has now absolutely no feelings for her. But beyond that, he's not even letting her down easily. Instead, he's just being needlessly cruel. There's always something ridiculous about the motions of people with whom one has ceased to love. This sounds like a sentence straight from Lord Henry's lips. Something ridiculous about the motions of people one has ceased to love. Sybil Vane seemed to him to be absurdly melodramatic. Her tears and sobs annoyed him. I do not wish to be unkind. Well, of course, that's exactly what he's doing. But I can't see you again. You have disappointed me. Okay. So we now have Dorian, who's walked out and said, I don't ever want to lay eyes on you again. And he said a myriad of cruel things. And Sybil is left literally lying on the floor like a trampled flower. Dorian spends most of the rest of the evening wandering the streets and sort of pondering over what has happened, feeling very sorry for himself because, of course, this has happened to him. He has no regard at this point for what he has done to Sybil and the state in which he has left her. Now, this is a very important part of the story in this chapter because it now links up to that moment in chapter 2. As he's turning the handle of the door, his eyes fell upon the portrait Basil Hallward had painted of him. Now remember, Basil had designed a special frame and sent the portrait to Dorian. He started back as if in surprise. And he goes back and he examines it. In the dim, arrested light that struggled through the cream-coloured silk blinds, the face appeared to him to be a little changed. The expression looked different. One would have said that there was a touch of cruelty in the mouth. It was certainly strange. So he then spends quite a lot of time examining this portrait because the change is very subtle, but he decides that it's definitely there. He rubbed his eyes and came close to the picture and examined it. The whole expression had altered. It was not mere fancy of his own. The thing was horribly apparent. And suddenly there flashed across his mind what he had said in Basil Hallward's studio the day the picture had been finished. Okay, so he remembers this mad wish that he himself might remain young and the portrait grow old, that his own beauty might be untarnished and the face on the canvas bear the burden of his passions and his sins. Surely his wish had not been fulfilled. Such things were impossible. And yet there was the picture before him with the touch of cruelty in the mouth. And so both Dorian and the reader now have to suspend disbelief and buy into the sort of magical, fantastical element of the novel, which is otherwise firmly grounded in reality, to realize that some sort of mystical exchange has taken place between Dorian and the painting. And indeed, that sort of mad wish, as he called it, that sort of not serious, but kind of just a wish that he didn't think about again, has actually come true. Cruelty, had he been cruel? It was the girl's fault, not his. She had been shallow and unworthy, and yet a feeling of infinite regret came over him as he thought of her lying at his feet, sobbing like a child. So, now Dorian reaches the point where he has to make a decision. Okay. Why had such a soul been given to him, but he had suffered also? During the 3 terrible hours that the play had lasted, he'd lived centuries of pain, and eon upon eon of torture. Poor little lamb. Okay. He feels his suffering so intensely. His life was well worth hers. She had marred him for a moment, if he had wounded her for an age. So Dorian, I said this is an important turning point for Dorian. He needs to now decide if he is going to allow the change he sees in the painting to make him reflect on what he's done and see the effect he's had on other people, or is he going to continue doing what he likes because he now kind of has agency to do that, and he will not suffer the consequences because he feels as if the painting will suffer the consequences. He's still very focused on his own pain. But the picture, what was he to say of that? It held the secret of his life and told his story. It had taught him to love his own beauty. Would it teach him to loathe his own soul? Would he ever look at it again? Now you can imagine if you had to bear externally the evidence of every bad thought and bad action you did. So every time you did something, it would change you in a way, more negatively. We would probably be a lot more careful about what we thought and what we did. So is Dorian going to allow the painting to become a visual of his consciousness? Or is he going to allow it to let him act without regard? A sense of infinite pity, not for himself, but for the painted image, came over him. It had altered already, and it would alter more. The gold would wither into grey, its red and white roses would die. For every sin that he committed, a stain would fleck and wreck its fairness. Okay. But he would not sin. The picture, changed or unchanged, would be to him the visible emblem of conscience. So at this point, our Dorian has taken the high road and realized that he has done wrong, and he's now going to allow this magical picture to be the visible emblem of his conscience. He would resist temptation. He would not see Lord Henry anymore, would not at any rate listen to the subtle poisonous theories. Interesting that he realizes the source of his actions are possibly rooted in the influence of Lord Henry, although I don't think we can entirely blame Lord Henry. He would go back to Sybil Vane, make her amends, marry her, try to love her again. Okay, and so the Dorian at the end of this chapter is resolved to resist temptation, not what Lord Henry told him in the garden, and said to him that you shouldn't resist temptation because it only injures your soul. You need to give in to temptation. That's the only way to live. The new hedonism. He doesn't want to live like this anymore. He's now seen the visible. Apparently, Sybil lying sobbing on the floor wasn't enough of a realization for him to change and want to be good. It had to affect him negatively. And so the horror, he gets up from his chair and he looks at the portrait and he says, how horrible. And he draws a screen in front of it. He can't bear to look on the cruelty as evident in the portrait. But the decision has not been because of his feeling bad for Sybil. It's because of the effect it's now having on him with the change of the portrait. But at any rate, his intentions now are to be good. Let's go back to that previous slide where he says, but he would not sin. The picture, changed or unchanged, would be to him the visible emblem of conscience. Okay, so it's very important for us to remember this point. This is Dorian's initial reaction to the portrait, and he feels at this point that he can now resist temptation, resist Lord Henry's influence, make up with Sybil, and try to love her again. And that is where we leave off for chapter 7.